Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I've decided to tell a story or two, maybe 3 if it goes well. All of these are true, word for word. I leave exaggeration to the numerous creepypasta threads. I lived in the middle of nowhere most of my life. As such, I found myself with a few normal friends and quite a few redneck acquaintances. I was young and hadn't been the most easily accepted kid because I came from a better background than most of them, so I took any opportunity for friendship. One of my redneck friends invited me and a couple other kids over to his house for his birthday. I didn't know any of them that well, so it was a little awkward, but I wanted to fit in. I was okay at first. We played on a trampoline, shot guns and bows at those fake Walmart deer, ate dinner and unwrapped some presents. There were only 4 kids, one of them was a girl. After dinner, it started getting dark. Her mother was there and said they needed to head home. Myself, birthday boy, and his other friend were planning to spend the night. The mother of the birthday boy was very sweet, but a little too liberal with 3 13-year-old boys. She decided it would be best to leave us to our own devices and go watch Reba or some shit. Being the outdoorsy type, the 2 other boys said we should go into the woods and look for wildlife. Again, trying to fit in, I agreed, under the condition we didn't take guns or bows. To be honest, they had scared me when we shot them. They were okay with that, so we set off into the woods aimlessly. The birthday boy's home wasn't out in the middle of the woods per se, but it was in a town situated amidst the middle of nowhere. While we were guaranteed not to get lost aimlessly and be found dead the next week, we were also guaranteed to get lost aimlessly, at least for a few hours. They told me eventually we'd hit a road. Having gauged my surroundings, I came to the same conclusion. We set off into the woods. It wasn't pitch black yet, but it was on its way. We each had a flashlight just in case we got really lost. Before long, we could hear the rustling of trees in the distance. I'm not sure what's so exciting about a deer in the woods, but those 2 left me in the dust chasing after it. They dove through more and more vegetation. Eventually, it was so dense it became a thicket. So, being stupid young boys, we began crawling through the thicket. If you have ever tried getting through a thicket, it's miserable. Twisting, winding, tight squeeze after tight squeeze, sometimes momentary immobility leading to panic attacks, especially if you're claustrophobic, like yours truly. All the while, with our faces practically in the mud, the rustling was just beyond our reach. We wasted a good 15 minutes clawing through that thicket, but the entire time the rustling continued. What confused me after the fact was the realization that a deer would have simply fled. 3 trapped teens stuck between vines would have been loud enough to frighten most living creatures away. At the time, it hadn't occurred to me, but since this is a true story, this was the memory that still bothers me to this day. The rustling didn't move away, or even sound like movement. It stayed the same volume, the same consistency, like something was just waiting there, shaking tree branches just out of our reach. By the time we had gotten through this mess of underbrush, it was really getting dark, like we should probably be heading back dark. In fact, I may have said that, being the nerd I was. But by now, these 2 woodsmen had to find that deer. So we headed on, eventually reaching a ravine that the friend of the birthday boy fell into. Some woodsman. It wasn't deep, so he climbed out, and we continued up a hill just past the creek bed. I expected to see a deer or a stray dog or even a bear, but there was nothing. It's hard to explain where you think a noise will be, but after 15 minutes of listening, it was clear that the noise was coming from here. And it continued the entire time, leading us to this spot, but now it had stopped. I thought it was a bit strange, but felt relieved knowing we could head back now that the 2 honkies hadn't gotten to see a deer. They didn't know where back was, and that was okay, because if we kept walking, we'd hit a road, even in the darkness, eventually. So we turned on our flashlights and pressed on. It was another 30 minutes before panic started to set in. I wasn't raised in the woods, nor did I feel at home in them, especially at night. It made it even worse when I noticed that my 2 companions, the ones I so blindly followed, were actually looking concerned as well. We were tripping over logs and holes that weren't there when our flashlights hovered over the same spot. It slowed us down tremendously and probably accounted for the amount of time that had passed in our seemingly futile effort at escaping the forest. Finally, we came to another hill, much higher than the rest. I breathed a sigh of relief. Literally, I remember that breath, because at this point it didn't matter what I knew about my surroundings. My mind was beginning to play tricks on me. What if we had missed a road or wandered into a section of forest past the town, into deeper, darker woods? What if we really were going to die out here, undiscovered? But that hill, thank God, that hill was higher than anything else we'd come upon. We all knew it would give us a vantage point to spotlights. If we could get out on the road in this small town, everyone knew everyone, we'd be picked up and taken back to the birthday boy's house to sleep peacefully until morning. So we climbed the hill, we climbed the A. I was too busy looking for lights in the distance to see what birthday boy did. "What is that?" came out of his mouth in an astonished, horrified whisper. It took a fraction of a second for me to realize what he was looking at. To our right, also at the top of the hill, was a tent in the distance. But it didn't look like anything you'd find at a sporting goods store. It looked old-timey, man-made, sticks and blanket style, and the fabric was black. The only reason we could even see it in the darkness was the soft glow of lit candles surrounding the entire exterior of the tent, just far enough to prevent causing a fire. At first, it crossed my mind that these two assholes had decided it would be fun to see the little city kid piss his pants in fear. However, they had definitely been lost alongside me. They also couldn't have left those candles for this long without leaving a serious amount of wax dripping from the sides. They looked like someone had just lit them. What made it even more frightening was the look of absolute fear on my friends' faces. I looked out over the hillside for any sign of a house or civilization. In the distance, I could see a few house lights, but they were pretty far away, probably another 30 minutes walk in the woods. I was ready to bolt for the house lights, but I was also curious about the tent. The three of us began walking towards it very slowly, ready to bolt if anything came out. But it was wide open and the light from the candles gave off enough brightness to see inside. There were a lot of candles. The tent was empty. As we got closer, I noticed the candles in front of the tent entrance formed a circle around something shining. It looked like a silver bowl of some sort, but it had nothing inside of it. We were about as close as we wanted to get to the tent, and the birthday boy's friend proposed leaving, which we all agreed was a fantastic idea. But before we turned to leave, I pointed my flashlight at the inside of the tent one last time. Two things caught my eye. There were no clothes, there was no camping equipment or water or food. Nothing. There was one thing. A book. No, it wasn't coated in human skin. It didn't have an eye that blinked when light hit it. It was just an old, ugly brown book. So we turned to leave, heading down the hill as fast as our feet could carry us. Near the bottom, I couldn't help but turn and look back up the hill. This part could be my imagination, you'll understand, given the circumstances of the evening, but I could barely make out the sound of rustling far away, like something was shaking tree limbs. It could have been a deer, or just my mind playing tricks. We continued on, and made it out to the homes where, sure enough, the guy living there knew the birthday boy's mom and took us home. Another thing that really bothered me about this experience was the fact that no one was inside that tent. It made me wonder what the owner was doing out in the pitch-black woods, leaving candles burning next to his stuff. That's the end of that one. I'll do another and see if people want me to keep going. Bear in mind, these are actual events in my life. There will be no ghosts jumping out screaming about dead children, or Hollywood special effects ring women climbing through TVs, so apologies if they are boring. When I was even younger, around 8 years old, my father worked in the Air Force. He was stationed at the Charleston Air Force Base for some of his career, so we made a lot of trips there to visit him, or just because it's a pretty cool city to have a weekend away in. I have never believed in the paranormal, but I've always been a willing participant, because it's fun to imagine finding proof when you don't believe. It's like playing the lottery knowing you won't win, then winning. Even if it'll never happen, it's fun to imagine. Anyways, as a child, my parents both said for some reason I had two extreme fascinations. One was dinosaurs, the other, Ghosts. I would want to go to every ghost tour or graveyard in every town we went to. The older the better. For those of you who know Charleston, you can imagine how excited I was every time we packed the car to go. Now that I'm older, I might have looked. It's possible some old weirdo was lighting candles in the woods to read Tolstoy or something, so his wife wouldn't find out he could read and leave him because he wasn't enough of a woodsman. Who knows?
Well, it could very well have been something stranger. People in that type of setting come from old practices and believe in old things. My grandparents were Old South themselves, and my grandmother practiced some kind of Cajun voodoo, or at least believed in something from down south.
My parents were polar opposites when it came to spirituality. My father, being a military man, was a diehard, if it won't smack me in my face, it isn't fucking real kind of guy, though towards the end of his life he changed that sentiment, perhaps out of fear. My mother, on the other hand, was and still is a spiritual woman, perhaps not God-fearing, but more of an afterlife believer. Suffice to say, they were both willing to go on tours if only to make me happy, and I loved ghost tours, and yet they were always fake, unsatisfying, overhyped. Even at 8, shit like the woods event above was far more frightening than anything I've seen and experienced on ghost tours. So we'd go through the cemeteries, take the tours, etc., etc. My dad always rolled his eyes or tried to frighten my mom or myself, usually my mom because she was much more vulnerable. He'd wait until the scariest part of the story, while the tour leader was taking us through a graveyard, and yell, "Gotcha," at my mom, who would scream alongside another tour goer, making the tour guide stop. Of course, as a result, everyone glared menacingly at my asshole dad, who ruined the best part of the tour and caused a few weaker individuals to wet themselves slightly. One night in Charleston, we had an especially long tour. It had gone through one of the 2 main cemeteries in town. You'll have to forgive me, I can't recall which one. My father looked down and realized I was not very happy. This was unusual given the fact I'd been shitting my pants to do a ghost tour, and usually after every one I was jumping for joy, ready to take the cameras and process them, before they had digital display, to see if we caught any ghosts. So Dad, being the doting parent he was, asked me what was wrong. They never take us to St. Lawrence Cemetery. I insert St. Lawrence because it was either this or Bethany that never got to have tours inside. Now, I'm an 8-year-old. I suppose at some point I might have read the cemetery lists on a phone book or something. But it's still surprising to my dad, who didn't know I kept a checklist of cemeteries under my bed for specific cemeteries. I didn't to my recollection. So my father asked me why I wanted to go to that specific cemetery so badly. I want to see the mausoleum of Colonel so-and-so. Again, I'm much older, so I don't remember, and my parents told this to me when I was older. But I specifically stated a full name, and I specifically called it a mausoleum, that I do know. At 8 years old, I'm nearly in tears over this according to Mom and Pop, and given that I rarely cried as a child, that seems strange enough. So they promised the very next day to take me to St. Lawrence to see Colonel so-and-so. I was one weird kid. The next day I'm up early. Not a little early, not earlier than usual. Christmas morning early. My mom has barely gotten a shower. She takes forever to get ready. I'm pitching a fit to leave. Again, not like me, I was usually a happy child. Finally, they've had enough. My dad yells at me, "Why am I so persistent about this cemetery? I've never done this before. What's so important about St. Lawrence? Colonel so-and-so. How do you even know there's someone there named Colonel so-and-so? Did the tour guide tell you?" "No, Colonel so-and-so did." Well, shit. My dad thinks I've gone nuts, but I persist. I'm practically pitching a full-blown tantrum to get to this cemetery. Mom isn't ready. She tells my dad to take me and get it over with, so I'll shut up. So Dad takes me off to St. Lawrence Cemetery. It's a bright, beautiful morning. The sun is just starting to rise as we get to the cemetery entrance. My father, the constant skeptic, asks me who told me this was such a big deal. "Colonel so-and-so, Dad." He tells me he wants me to cut it out, that this is ridiculous, and I never used to make up stuff about ghosts. I start to get angrier, insisting that it was this person as Dad threatens to turn around and not let me go to the cemetery. My dad was pretty quick when it came to detecting bullshit, and he was military, so he was even more challenging than most parents toward my imagination, though he did let it roam a bit. Recounting the story, he told me he smirked at me and asked me if I was so sure this person was buried here, to tell him what his date of birth was. Here's where I can only give you what my parents told me, and I cannot confirm this as truth like the other story. My only means of truth is to say that my dad didn't make shit up. My mother tends to exaggerate, but not my father. Again, chalk it up to being in the military. I will, however, skip ahead to our return from the cemetery, for the sake of suspense, not to change the events. My mother is doing her hair by the time we return. Yes, it was that quick, she hadn't finished her hair. I literally only wanted to see Colonel So-and-so's grave. And we would have stopped for breakfast, I assume, had events unfolded differently. As it stood, my father probably wasn't hungry. My mother, still curling that hair that took hours to do, turned to him as he entered. That was quick. Did you get it out of his system or did you She stops. Something's wrong. My father is white as a sheet. Perhaps not that white, remember, I'm not exaggerating in these stories. He's pale, like he's low on blood sugar. My mother is afraid something has happened to me, until she sees me behind my father looking meek like I'm scared I'm in trouble. My father, as he told me later, explained to my mother that when he asked for the date of birth, I confidently rattled off a string of numbers, followed by the date of death, and the epitaph on the mausoleum, which was extremely long and well-worded. I also knew the exact location of the grave. While we're on the subject, there was a grave for Colonel So-and-so. Actually, it was a mausoleum. My father told me I had gotten the date of birth, date of death, and epitaph correct. When he asked me how I remembered all that, or if I'd even ever been there, I told him that Colonel So-and-so read it to me. My dad never told anyone that story except my mother and me. He only told me when he was much older, near his last few years alive. I never remembered any of it, or the name, cemetery, or location of the grave. But I remember how my father told me about it. He didn't seem to think it was funny or some spooky fireside story. He seemed dead serious, so I've always considered it something frighteningly real in my life, even though by my account it never happened. That's the end of that one. I have a couple more experiences. Are these interesting? Even younger still. I feel like I'm going to tell a ghost story about sperm cells next. My mother used to tote me around everywhere as a child because she wasn't able to find a sitter she trusted, so she'd drive me to work where they'd established a daycare just because of me. My mother had worked her way up enough that it was worthwhile for them to accommodate her until she found a more stable daycare situation. Usually I'd sit in the back seat. I was apparently a very well-behaved child and rarely made a fuss in the car or at the daycare. My mother was never very close to her side of the family, and we lived far away at the time, so we didn't get to visit much. My father, meanwhile, was usually away. He had just gotten a job as a commercial pilot, but was still doing work in the Air Force, so he wasn't around much when I was really young. One day, after work, my mother gets a call. She's told her childhood best friend, who she'd lost touch with but loved dearly, is dying in the hospital. A little background, my mother had a very rough life as a child. She counted her childhood friends as her only friends up to the point where she met my father, and even though she physically lost touch, she never stopped loving them. They were there for her when her father and mother died, so to her, they were her family. This news was devastating to my mom, even at this stage in life. She calls my father and explains that she's going to make the trip to visit her childhood friend before she passes away. It will involve a 3-hour plane trip, and since he's a commercial pilot, she can ride free. This is back before pass riding was such a pain, so we get on right away, and within hours my mother and I are in flight. And 3 hours later, we're grabbing a rent-a-car. Now, all the while, my mother is crying in tears. She's very sensitive and prone to attachment, so death hits her especially hard. She's trying her damnedest to get to her friend's side, if only to say goodbye and let her friend know she was there. Mommy. She's still crying. Yes, honey. She looks back. I'm also crying. I'm 3 years old. You're not going to make it, Mommy. My mother told me she practically drove off the road, coming to a stop on the side of the busy interstate. She said she didn't stop to think how I knew what was even going on. She just screamed at me that I didn't know that, and what a horrible thing I'd said. She said that I just looked up at her with huge tears in my eyes. I'd never met this woman, and said something like, "But she's gone." Back then, cell phones were those big clunky things that had horrible reception, and hardly anyone had, so my mother just ignored me, albeit in a terrified manner, and continued to the hospital. After this exchange, we were still only about 45 minutes from the hospital, I think. It might have been longer, I don't remember what Mom told me. We arrived at the hospital and Mom said she jerked me from the car seat. I was still crying, so she just picked me up and carried me into the entrance rather than dealing with my terrible 3's temper tantrum. Scary shit apparently made me a bad child. We enter the foyer and were greeted by my mother's cousins, all women, in an even sorrier state than the two of us. My mom said that's when it all hit her. She told me it was one of the most terrifying feelings she'd ever had. The culmination of losing a loved one, experiencing something unbelievable, and being hysterical all at once hitting her. Her best friend had died before she arrived. They had tried to revive her for about 45 minutes. Here's where time matters, because I don't know the specifics due to memory, but you get the drift, prior, and she had flatlined. My mother had a breakdown, so much so that she told me later the other women thought it was work combined with single parenting, and the death that caused it. My mom told me it wasn't that. It was how terrified she was by the experience. Normally it would end there, but because I'm apparently the freakiest child since the little girl from Poltergeist, I have one more thing to add. The drive back to the airport was sad, but uneventful. My mother hadn't stayed to visit since she was due back at work the next day and had specifically come to say her goodbyes. It was more of a beat-the-clock trip than for visiting. So we boarded the plane and were on our way back home. Mom didn't speak to me the whole way. I do remember one thing, being scared I was in trouble. She said she didn't even look at me the entire trip. We landed late at night. By that time my mom was exhausted and I was asleep. So she carried me to the car and buckled me up in the back, and she started driving. It isn't a super long trip back home from our airport at the time, but knowing how shitty it feels to drive anywhere after a day like that, I can assume it was pretty miserable getting back to the house that evening for Mom. I don't know if she was drifting off or what. She said she was exhausted. She says that often. Regardless, she's about 3/4 of the way home, and I'm dead asleep until the 3/4 mark. Because as my mother is falling asleep at the wheel, her 3-year-old son jerked his head up from a deep sleep wide-eyed and started crying again. Not crying, wailing. My mom practically drove off the road. I know it sounds like I was the worst child in existence. Maybe I was. I was coughing up a lung in hysterics as my mother tried to calm me in the middle of the night on a back road. Mom told me I kept saying I couldn't hear her. I'm only 3, so between ear-piercing squeals and gurgles, it's no surprise I couldn't hear my mother. And this is what she thought I meant, so she tried calming me down, to no avail. I just kept screaming and I couldn't hear her. And then I stopped. When she tells me the story, she says it was like I was never crying to begin with. I just stopped, and I looked calm. Then I looked at my mother and told her that she knew she tried, and so was doing okay. I didn't call her childhood friend by her first name. It was a nickname the two had always used between two close friends as children. My mother broke down in tears. To this day, she swears by that story, though I count her tendency to exaggerate as a potential flaw in its truthfulness. Still, it doesn't seem like her to make the death of a friend into some means of making her child sound spooky around a fire for a few close friends. I've got one more short one. Then I'll have to try and remember if I have any events that happen to people I know, since that's the extent of my experiences personally.
Awesome. Your last story reminds me of a story that involves my brother. My parents were going to visit some friends with my brother in the car. He's older than I am. I don't know if I was even born yet. And they were going to their friend's house. I wonder what Mike and them are doing right now, my dad said. They're washing their new car, my brother replies. My family just laughed it off until they pulled into their friend's house to find them washing their new car.
This also happened in Charleston, but on a different trip. My parents always stayed in nice hotels. They got all those discounts from the airline my dad worked for and the military, so we got to stay in the nicer areas. We have had a pretty good life. My mother had nicer jewelry and nicer cars. But her prized possession was a double diamond ring that contained the diamond from her deceased mother's wedding ring and one my father had given them. The two, ignoring a close inspection, were almost identical. She cherished that ring. 4 years prior, we were robbed by cleaners, so she had slowly been rebuilding her valuables on any special occasion. One evening, we met up with my dad while he was given a weekend off. He came and stayed off base with us in a really nice hotel. I was probably around 10 then, and I never got away from the Game Boy at the time, so I kept to myself and my parents nagged me until they got tired of it and left me alone in the hotel to go to dinner. I had pretty liberal parents, I might add. One night, they go out much later than my bedtime. I'm still up and they want me to come along, telling me I can stay up later if I go and we're going to have a really luxurious dinner, etc., etc. My mom is dolled up in her nicest shit, and of course her wedding ring, which never leaves her hand. I skip it. Got Kirby's Dreamland to keep me warm, fuck filet mignon. But I'm still a little 10-year-old wimp, and by the time they get home, I'm dead asleep. The next morning, my mother is panicking. I should mention she was very skinny at that age, so skinny that most things, including jewelry, just slid right off. She's lost her wedding ring. I'm still dead asleep. Dad has gotten up early because he has to return to base, and as such, he's woken Mom up. She can't leave without her ring. Where is it? Where could she have left it? Me, snoring, in Kirby's Dreamland, still recovering from a 5-hour unbridled Game Boy coma. I mumble something about a ring. She whips around. What did I say? I'm still dead asleep, but half mumble, under bed in sheets, bottom of bed. She checks I'm spot on. Less interesting than the rest, but I was out cold from the moment they got home, to the moment she lost the ring. They said they let me sleep extra that morning too, so I didn't wake up right after it either. Sleep-talking detective shit right there. And that's it. I'm gonna take a break. If I remember one worth telling, I'll post again. I'm not gonna make shit up just to have something to post. Hope everyone enjoyed it. I remember one more story. The weirdest one of them all in my opinion. But I haven't thought about it in forever. It's obvious by now that I got to travel a lot. We went international as well, which was always my favorite, especially back when we got to ride first class for being pass riders. Nowadays, you're shit on a stick. My first trip overseas was to Scotland and England. While I could recount a number of ghost tours and graveyard visits, it was largely uneventful from a purely paranormal perspective, until Scotland. Part of my family's heritage is traced to a number of abbeys throughout Scotland, so my father made it a point to visit a few of them on our trip. One of them, and one of the most famous in Scotland, was Holyrood Abbey in Edinburgh. Sadly, time and history have not treated the 12th century church the best, and it's in a state of ruin that provides a tragically beautiful picture of mankind and nature. Vines creep throughout the structure, pillars sink into sod, which creeps up and over them, coating them in a slick peat-like moss. It was unlike anything I'd seen in the US. Seeing as it was in such a state of ruin, it had to constantly be worked on for preservation's sake, or it would crumble into the mire beneath it. If anyone ventured there now, they'd like to find it in a state of construction or renovation, or at the very least see excavations occurring trying to salvage undiscovered burial sites, and that's exactly what we came across when we visited. Enormous unearthed stone caskets, sealed shut and too heavy to move if you wanted to. The excavation team figured, hell, no one's going to steal the contents if the lid weighs more than the average car. Right they were, except for one thing. They didn't count on some weird kid going from tomb to tomb examining every crack and crevice for any signs of something interesting. As fantastic as this may sound, I did this often as a child and never with any results. Usually my biggest discovery was a poached deer in the woods behind my house, or a wishbone someone dropped next to a grave while eating fried chicken to celebrate their morbidly obese significant other. But today, of all days, of all places, I came across something interesting, jutting out of the heavy rock tomb. This one was slightly askew, just enough that the contents within could potentially have shifted or been disturbed enough to get caught in the tiny opening. And sure enough, a tiny bone was wedged between the lid and the opening. I was young, but not too young to know my chances were slim of pulling a monk's knuckle from between two slabs of ancient stone. But I tried anyways. It came loose. Careful not to be seen in a state of exuberance amidst heaps of tourists, I buried the find deep in my pocket and walked away as calmly as I could so I wouldn't arouse suspicion. I wasn't even sure what the punishment for stealing a 13th century monk's knuckle was, and I wasn't about to find out. So I rushed off to another part of the abbey to examine my prize. Even at a young age, I was a skeptic. I knew that despite me digging a bone from an excavated stone gravesite, right out of the crack between the coffin's opening, it was still highly likely I'd just grabbed a rock or clod of dirt. I opened my hand slowly to reveal a real bone, unlike any I'd seen before. Browned with age, it didn't look like any bone I'd come across. It seemed to have ages of wear and tear. I'd be damned, at the very least it was ancient. And it appeared human. I could almost match it to the bone protruding from my own knuckle. Eventually, after being lectured about disturbing the dead and being irreverent, my father began to refer to it as the monkey knuckle. He'd explained that his son had stolen the bones from a 12th century abbey and cursed us all for life. Now, nothing bad has happened to me in my time since taking the bone. I still have it, buried somewhere in my collection of dinosaur fossils and human anatomical parts given to me by a family friend who happens to have access to numerous study samples. A creepy aside, he gives them away as presents. Apparently he can come by femurs more easily than a Hallmark card and $25. But despite no catastrophic events, a few things have happened since taking the bone. The most notable thing involved the sequential visits to Scotland. Both trips have seen close family friends pass away immediately after returning home. Following my retrieval of the bone, I stashed it away in a storage area situated under my house. By under, I mean under, like getting on your knees and crawling through the space between the floor and the earth. It's a weird setup. Our house was renovated, but a crawl space has a door that opens into the actual dirt area beneath the home. So yeah, being a teenage boy with shit to hide, it went there. Years passed, and I honestly forgot the shit was back there. I met a girl, began dating her, fell in love, blah blah blah. And like all successful relationships, this one eventually led to my confession of owning a human femur, fossilized dinosaur shit, and the fossil of a whale's ear amongst other grotesque objects. And because she was a girl, and didn't even know whales had ears, let alone ear bones, she wanted to see. So, after years forgotten, I crawled into the underside of the house to retrieve my childhood treasures.
Happy birthday, here's someone's thigh.
Honestly, that's exactly how it went. We're talking unwrapping presents, then finding one elongated object wrapped in Winnie the Pooh wrapping paper. Maybe it's a pogo stick? Nope, femur. Again, truth. Weird, but true. I honestly looked forward to the presents. They were unique. Anyways, I'm crawling back into this crawl space to prove to the love of my life that whales have ears, and I begin to smell something. It's unfamiliar, especially given the fact I'm crawling through dirt, which has a very unique smell. Dirt. I can't figure out what the hell it is for the life of me, but it's strong and unusual. I chalk it up to Mom cooking cinnamon on the stove. She did that sometimes, but secretly know that's bull. It has such a distinct smell, spicy but different than cinnamon, almost like. It hits me a day or two later. The smell was like stale incense. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I used to be an acolyte, so I knew what it smelled like once it clicked, but age had caused the memory of the smell to fade along with my faith. But there it was, incense. Once I knew that smell, it always smelled that way under there. So much so I began to get scared to go back there. It still didn't click that the bone I'd found was still sitting on the shelf with the other items, or that the smell got stronger as I got closer to my collection. That clicked later. Since then, I haven't been back down there. The final thing isn't my experience so much as my friend's. He had recently returned from a trip to Scotland and was dropping by to give me a gift. We basically skipped birthdays and just gave gifts whenever we went on vacation. So he stops by, and we go out and grab a bite to eat, catch up. He tells me about his trip. He visited Holyrood Abbey too. I ask him if they're still digging shit up. He says no, all but one of the grave sites has been covered. I don't ask which. We finish eating and head back home. Mom yells at me to feed the dogs. We have 8 dogs. It's gonna be a while. So I return from my hour-long excursion and my friend asks me where the music is coming from. He said he went downstairs to see if I had the TV on, but nothing. I obviously ask if he's been dropping acid. Not really. He tells me it was like a chant he heard on his trip. Pulls up YouTube, thank God for the internet now. Links me to a Gregorian chant. I'm freaking out. Despite a Gregorian chant being unlikely, the monks of Holyrood were canons regular, who also had a chant similar to the Gregorian style. He tells me it was faint, like it was far away, or on very low volume, almost muffled. I've never heard it.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.